In 1934, the county extension agent told farm wives to never pour out a single drop of bacon grease. "Keep it in a can by the stove," she said, "and cook everything in it." Today we wash it down the drain and call it unhealthy. But here is the twist. Half the things your grandmother did on instinct are now sold back to us as gourmet, organic, or ancestral. Number 12 on this list was so valuable that families fought over it after a funeral. And number 3 turned a single autumn afternoon into a whole winter of breakfasts. These habits were not quaint. They were survival, stretched into an art form. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because some of these might just change how you run your own kitchen. Let us count down the 25 forgotten farmhouse habits every country grandmother once had. Number 25, saving butter wrappers to grease the pans. Nothing was left of that wax paper butter wrapper before it had done its second job. Your grandmother peeled it off the stick, folded it greasy side in, and tucked it into the icebox door. When a cake or a pan of cornbread went into the oven, she pulled out that wrapper and wiped it around the inside of the pan, leaving a thin film of butter in every corner. There was just enough fat clinging to the paper to coat a pan perfectly. No waste, no extra spoonful dug out of the crock. A pound of butter cost about a quarter in the 1930s, and on a farm where money came in twice a year at harvest, you did not melt good butter for greasing when the wrapper would do it for free. The cake never stuck. We buy cooking spray now in a can that costs more than the butter did. Number 24, the bacon grease can on the back of the stove. Every farmhouse had it. An old coffee can, sometimes a fancier ceramic crock, sitting on the warm corner of the cook stove, slowly filling with strained drippings. After breakfast, your grandmother poured the hot fat through a little screen to catch the bits, and that golden grease became the engine of the whole kitchen. She fried eggs in it, started her gravy with it, greased the cornbread skillet, and seasoned a pot of green beans with a spoonful. It carried flavor that no bottle of oil could match. A pound of bacon went twice as far when its fat kept working for a week afterward. Doctors later told us to throw it out, and we did, and we replaced it with shortening we now know was worse. That humble can held more flavor than anything on the shelf today. Number 23, reviving wilted greens in cold spring water. When the lettuce or the poke greens came in from the garden gone limp in the July heat, your grandmother never tossed them. She filled a dishpan with the coldest water she could draw, sometimes straight from the spring, added a splash of vinegar, and laid those sad leaves in to soak for 15 minutes. They drank the water back up through every cell and came out crisp and snapping again. The vinegar cleaned the grit and the bugs better than plain water ever could. A head of lettuce was hours of weeding and watering, far too dear to throw on the compost over a little wilt. This was the same instinct that ran the whole kitchen. Nothing got thrown out if cold water and a little patience could save it. We bag our salad now and pitch the whole sack when it slumps. Number 22, reading the oven by hand. That black iron cook stove had no dial, no little window, no thermometer. Your grandmother knew the heat by feel. She would open the oven door, hold her bare hand in the middle, and count. If she could hold it steady for the count of 20, that was a slow oven for custards. A count of 10 or 12 was just right for bread. If she could barely hold it past 5, it was hot enough for biscuits. Some women threw in a pinch of flour and watched how fast it browned. This was knowledge in the hands and the eyes, learned at her own mother's elbow over years. There was no recipe that said 350 degrees because there was no way to measure it. She judged the fire, the wood, and the weather all at once, and the bread came out right anyway. Number 21, letting the milk clabber. Before refrigeration reached the farm, fresh milk did not stay fresh, and your grandmother did not consider that a problem. She let it sit in a covered crock in a cool corner until it thickened and soured into clabber, a soft, tangy curd somewhere between yogurt and buttermilk. The children ate it with a little sugar and nutmeg. She baked with it because the acid made her biscuits rise tall and her cakes tender. The leftover whey went into the bread or out to the hogs. Milk was never wasted because it turned. It just became something new. We have been taught to fear a single day past the date stamp, but a whole tradition of farm cooking was built on milk that had gently soured on purpose. The same bacteria we now pay for in expensive yogurt cups were working for free in her crock. Number 20, sour milk and saleratus for the lightest biscuits. Here is the first place the chemistry gets clever. Before baking powder came in tins, your grandmother leavened with saleratus, the old name for baking soda, and she paired it with sour milk or clabber on purpose. The acid in the soured milk reacted with the soda the instant they met, fizzing into tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide that lifted the dough. That is why farm biscuits rose so high and so fast, they had to go straight into a hot oven before the reaction died. Sweet milk and soda alone left a bitter, soapy taste, and she knew it. The sourness was not a flaw to cover up. It was the engine that made the bread climb. Modern bakers reach for a can of double-acting baking powder and never learn the reaction their grandmother controlled by taste and by smell, with nothing but a crock of turned milk. Number 19, the flour sack that became everything. Mills figured out early that farm women used the cloth from flour and feed sacks, so by the 1930s they printed those sacks in cheerful florals and gingham, knowing it sold the flour. Your grandmother chose the bag partly for the fabric inside it. That empty 50-pound sack became a dress for a little girl, an apron, dish towels, pillowcases, even diapers and underclothes. The plain ones were bleached soft for biscuit cloths and straining bags. Nothing about the purchase was wasted, not the flour and not the cotton that held it. A new dress from a store cost real cash that a farm rarely saw, so a dress that arrived free, wrapped around the family's flour, was a small miracle repeated all year. We pay extra now for the same printed cotton sold as vintage by the yard. Number 18, drying apples on the porch roof. When the orchard came in all at once in September, there was no way to eat or can every bushel, so your grandmother dried them. She peeled and cored and sliced the apples thin, threaded them on string, or spread them on clean cloths laid over the porch roof or a screen in the sun. For days, she carried them in at night against the dew and back out at dawn until the slices turned leathery and chewy and would keep for a year in a sack hung from the rafters. In the dead of winter, those dried rings became fried apple pies, stewed apples for breakfast, the sweet center of a stack cake. The sun did the work for free. We buy dried apples now in little bags at the checkout counter, never knowing they were once a porch covered in fruit and a child's job to chase off the flies. Number 17, leather britches beans on a string. This one looks strange to modern eyes. When the green beans flooded the garden, your grandmother strung the whole pods, raw and unbroken, onto a long thread with a needle, then hung the strings to dry behind the cook stove or across the porch. As they shriveled, they curled and wrinkled like little worn-out trousers, which is exactly how they got the name leather britches. Come January, she dropped a handful into a pot with a piece of fat pork and let them simmer slow for hours until they plumped back up, smoky and rich and unlike any fresh bean. It was a way to keep a summer crop with no jars, no canner, and no money spent. A whole mountain tradition hung on those strings. Today, almost no one remembers that a green bean could be saved with nothing but a needle and a warm wall. Number 16, the punched tin PI safe. Before screens and refrigerators, where did you keep a pie cooling and a loaf of bread safe from flies and mice? Your grandmother kept them in the pie safe, a tall wooden cupboard with doors of tin punched full of tiny holes in patterns of stars and hearts and tulips. Those holes let AIR move through so a pie cooled and bread breathed without going moldy, while the metal kept the critters out. It usually stood in the cool of the back porch or the pantry. The punched patterns were beautiful, but they were not decoration. Each hole was function first, made by hand with a nail and a hammer on a winter evening. People hunt these down now as antiques and put silverware in them. They were once the hardest working piece of furniture in the house, guarding the family's daily bread. Number 15, vinegar pie and the Desperation desserts. Here comes a little controversy. By late winter, the fruit was gone, the cellar apples were spent, and there was no money for anything fancy, but your grandmother still set a pie on the Sunday table. She made vinegar pie. A splash of apple cider vinegar, sugar, a little flour, an egg, and water, baked in a crust, came out tasting shockingly like lemon in a place where a lemon was a luxury nobody could afford. Right beside it, in the old recipe boxes, you find water pie, sugar cream pie, and chess pie, all built from pantry staples when nothing else was left. People sneer at these now as poverty food. But they were proof of something better. Your grandmother refused to let her family go without a sweet at the end of the week, even when she had almost nothing, and she conjured dessert out of vinegar and faith. Number 14, putting eggs down in water glass for winter. Hens lay heavy in spring and summer and nearly quit in the cold, dark months, so your grandmother stored up the surplus while she could. She filled a stone crock with water glass, a thick solution of sodium silicate, and gently lowered fresh, unwashed eggs into it. The sealant filled the pores of the shell and kept the air out, and those eggs stayed good for cooking and baking for 8 or 9 months in the cool of the cellar. Families fought a little over the last of them. By February, a single fresh-tasting egg from the crock was worth real coin. Refrigeration and the year-round grocery egg made the practice vanish almost overnight. Now, the old-timers' word water glass means nothing to most people, but it once meant the difference between cornbread with eggs and cornbread without, all winter long. Number 13, salt-rising bread, the smelly miracle. Long before anyone could buy a packet of yeast, your grandmother could still make a high, fine-crumbed loaf using nothing but cornmeal, milk, a little sugar, and warmth. She mixed a starter at night and kept it warm by the banked fire, and by morning it had begun to bubble and give off a sharp, cheesy, almost unpleasant smell that told her the wild bacteria had woken up. That funk was the secret. The fermentation came from bacteria, not true yeast, which is why the loaf had its own dense, velvety texture and a flavor nothing else could copy. It was famously cranky to make, failing if the temperature drifted even a little. A woman who could reliably raise a salt-rising loaf was respected for it. The bread is nearly extinct now, too temperamental for a hurried world, but those who remember it still go a little misty. Number 12, rendering the lard at hog killing time. Here is the second turn where the old way beat the new. When the weather turned cold enough to butcher, the the whole family gathered for hog killing day, and the most precious work was rendering the fat. Your grandmother cut the back fat and leaf lard into chunks and cooked them low in a big iron kettle until the fat melted clear and the cracklings floated golden. She strained that pure white lard into crocks, where it kept for a year without spoiling. No refrigeration needed. That lard made the flakiest pie crust on earth, the lightest biscuits, the best fried chicken anyone ever tasted. Families divided it up like treasure. Then we were told animal fat was poison and traded it for hydrogenated shortening, and bakers everywhere quietly wondered why their crusts went tough. Cooks are rediscovering leaf lard now and paying premium prices for what once dripped free from a kettle in the yard. Number 11. The Smokehouse and the salt pork barrel. With no freezer and a whole hog to keep, your grandmother and grandfather preserved the meat the only way they could, with salt and smoke. The hams and shoulders were packed in salt or rubbed with a salt and sugar cure, then hung in the smokehouse over a slow, smoldering fire of hickory or apple wood for days, until they were sealed against spoiling. The salt drew out the moisture that rot needs to grow. Plain science she understood by results, if not by name. Streak of lean side meat went down into a barrel of brine to become the salt pork that seasoned a year of beans and greens. A country ham aged in that smokehouse came out worth a small fortune in flavor. We buy a cellophane-wrapped ham at the store now, injected with water, and have no idea what a real one once tasted like. Number 10. Making lye soap from lard and ashes. Nothing on the farm was thrown away, not even the wood ash from the stove or the scraps of fat too poor to cook with. Your grandmother poured water slowly through a barrel of hardwood ashes to leach out lye, then cooked that lye together with her saved fat and cracklings in a kettle until the two reacted and thickened into soap. That chemical reaction has a name, saponification, where the lye and the fat transform into something entirely new that lifts away dirt and grease. She poured it into pans to cure, then cut it into bars that scrubbed clothes, floors, dishes, and children all year. It cost nothing but ashes, fat, and a long afternoon of careful stirring. We pay good money now for handmade soap advertised as old-fashioned, made the very way she made it because she had no other choice. Number 9. Scouring with wood ash, sand, and a corn cob. Before there was a cleaning product for every job, your grandmother cleaned with what the farm gave her. A pinch of damp wood ash on a rag scoured the black off a pot, because the ash was mildly caustic and abrasive at once. Fine sand and a stiff brush brought a greasy skillet back to bare metal. A dried corn cob made a fine scrubber for the cast iron, stiff enough to clean it, but gentle enough to leave the seasoning. Salt cut through the grease and lifted stains from the cutting boards. None of it came in a bottle, and none of it cost a cent beyond what the place produced anyway. She kept a spotless kitchen with the leavings of the stove and the field. We stand in long store aisles now, choosing among a dozen sprays for what ash and a cob once did. Number 8. Switchel, the haymaker's punch. Here is one that is roaring back into style. On a blistering day in the hayfield, your grandmother sent out a jug of Switchel, a drink of water mixed with cider vinegar, a little molasses or honey, and a knob of ginger. It was the farm's own sports drink long before anyone sold one. The vinegar and molasses replaced what sweat carried off, the ginger settled the stomach, and the whole thing quenched a thirst that plain water could not touch on a brutal afternoon. Men swore it kept them going through the last load of hay at dusk. It cost almost nothing and was mixed in the same crock jug year after year. You can buy Switchel in a glass bottle now at the trendy market for several dollars, sold as a wellness tonic. Your great-grandmother drank it from a tin cup in the shade of the wagon. Number 7. The crock of kraut working in the cellar. When the cabbage came in heavy, your grandmother shredded it fine, salted it, and packed it down hard into a big stoneware crock, weighing it under a plate and a clean stone so the brine rose over the top. Then she set it in the cool cellar and let time and salt do the rest. Over weeks, the cabbage bubbled and soured as the good bacteria turned it into sauerkraut that kept all winter and tasted alive. The same crock held cucumbers, turning into real brine pickles, no vinegar needed. This was lacto-fermentation, the very thing now sold at a premium and praised by doctors for the gut. She did not know the word. She knew that a crock of kraut meant tang and crunch and vitamins on the table in February. We buy a small jar of the same thing now, pasteurized until the living part is gone. Number 6, the root cellar and the springhouse. Long before the refrigerator hummed in the corner, your grandmother kept a whole season's food cold, using nothing but the earth and the spring. The root cellar, dug into a bank or beneath the house, held a steady cool all winter, and there she stored potatoes, apples, cabbages, turnips, and crocks of preserves where they would not freeze or rot. If the place had a spring, the springhouse straddled the cold running water, and crocks of milk, butter, and cream sat down in that flow, staying fresh through the hottest July. It cost nothing to run and never broke down. Generations fed themselves through winter on what those cool, dark rooms protected. We have forgotten the trick entirely, depending on a machine and a power line, while the same hillside that cooled her butter sits unused beside many an old farmhouse today. Number 5, the soup pot that never really emptied. Sunday's chicken did not end on Sunday. Your grandmother carried the carcass, the wilting vegetables, the bacon rind, the bean liquor, and every odd scrap into a pot of water and let it simmer at the back of the stove into a stock that anchored the meals to come. Monday it might be soup, Tuesday the base of a gravy, Wednesday thinned for the dumplings. The pot was topped up rather than dumped, so a thread of flavor ran through the whole week. Bones gave up their richness, and nothing edible ever reached the slop bucket if it could feed people first. This was thrift turned into deep, slow flavor that no bouillon cube imitates. Restaurants charge dearly now for bone broth simmered exactly the way she ran her kitchen out of plain necessity, never imagining the scraps in her pot would one day be fashionable. Number 4, putting up the harvest in mason jars. When the garden came in all at once in the high heat of summer, your grandmother stood over a steaming canner for days, sealing the year into glass. Tomatoes, green beans, corn, peaches, pickles, jams, and jelly all went into mason jars sterilized in boiling water, the lids sealing with that satisfying little ping as they cooled. A full cellar shelf, gleaming with colored jars, was not just food. It was the proof that the family would eat through the winter and a quiet point of pride judged at the county fair. She knew without a thermometer how long each thing needed to be safe. Every jar she filled in August was a January supper already waiting. We have largely surrendered this to the grocery store and lost the rhythm of the seasons that canning kept, where summer's heat was stored against the cold to come. Number 3, apple butter day around the copper kettle. This was an all-day event, almost a festival. Your grandmother gathered the whole family at first light, set a great copper kettle over an open fire in the yard, and filled it with bushels of apples cooked down to sauce. Then the long part began. Someone had to stir constantly with a long wooden paddle, hour after hour, so the butter never scorched on the copper, while sugar and cinnamon went in, and the whole place filled with a smell that carried clear across the farm. By dusk, the apples had cooked down dark and thick and spreadable, and it was ladled hot into crocks and jars to last the year. Neighbors took turns at the paddle and went home with a jar for their help. A single autumn day, a fire and a kettle turned an orchard into a winter of breakfasts. Almost no one stirs a copper kettle anymore. Number 2, saving the seeds from the best of the crop. Your grandmother's garden did not start at a store rack each spring. It started in envelopes and jars she had filled herself the autumn before. She watched the garden all season and marked the finest plants, the tomato that bore earliest, the beans that climbed strongest, the squash that kept longest, and she let those go to seed instead of eating them. She dried the seeds on the windowsill, folded them into labeled paper, and kept them dry through winter to plant again. Year after year, her crops grew better suited to her own soil and weather because she chose the best each time. Those seeds were a kind of inheritance, sometimes carried across the country in a pocket when a family moved. We buy a fresh packet every spring now and have lost the slow, patient breeding that made a family's beans truly their own. Number 1, the starter that never died. At the very heart of the farmhouse kitchen lived something almost alive, and your grandmother fed it like a member of the family. A crock of sourdough starter, the wild leavening she kept going for years, sometimes for decades, handed down from her own mother and shared in dollops with new brides and neighbors. She fed it with flour and water, kept it warm by the stove, and from it came her bread, her flapjacks, her biscuits, all rising on a culture older than some of the children. It asked for daily attention and gave daily bread in return. People pay now for heritage starters mailed in little packages, never knowing that a living loaf once sat warm on every farmhouse stove, passed hand to hand like a flame that was never allowed to go out. These were not quaint old habits. They were intelligence, patience, and a refusal to waste, built into the daily rhythm of a country kitchen. Try just one this week. Keep the bacon grease. Soak the wilted greens. Start a crock of kraut. Tell me in the comments which one your grandmother did and which one you are bringing back. She knew something we forgot, and now you know it too.